Hi there, everybody. I'm Elisa Malengo, spiritual medium and transformational coach, and today we are going to talk about permission to grieve. I have a very special guest who wrote an amazing book that, if you haven't been into my office and I've tossed it your way, you're really going to want to sit and watch this, because this book is so amazing. It has transcribed so many lives, and especially mine. And I sit with grief on a daily basis, and you guys know that. And this amazing woman has really helped me in being able to be more available to those who are grieving in my own work, and to hold space for them through this book. So let me just share with you real quick. My guest is Kim Murdock. And Kim, I've had the glasses for a sec. Here we go. Okay. Kim is a writer, editor, and coach who has made it her mission to help those dealing with the loss of a loved one, particularly a spouse. After becoming a widow at 42, she didn't want people to tell her how to heal, or that everything happens for a reason. She just wanted to know that her feelings were normal. In a candid and heartfelt way, she expresses what many, maybe even most grieving people feel and experience. So you know you're not alone. Kim Murdock, welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for writing this book. I was stumbling through it a little bit with my dyslexia, but we work through it. But yes, thank you so much. The book is Feeling Left Behind, Permission to Grieve. And what I loved so much about the title, and I know that you were back and forth on the title, and I feel so blessed that I got to be a vicarious part of this work of the heart that you were able to unfold. And I was able to watch your journey, feel your journey, and be with your journey. So in that, I love the title. I love the process that it took you to get here. And I would just love to share a little bit more about the book. I love that you write some of the key parts that I'd love to tap into, but I'd also want to tap in as much as we possibly can. The crushing desire to freeze time and isolate yourself. This was just so profound to me. The unstable phase of first holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries. The anger and sadness at seeing other couples. The loss of self, empathy, security, and tolerance. The heartbreaking sadness of getting rid of their belongings. I know that we've had talks on that many times, and so much more. And also a few of the chapters that I love in there is one is going to the grocery store, that being kind of excruciating, and just simple things like that. So I love that you took this topic and you made it personal, I really feel. So thank you so much for that. And what really, if we could start, what really inspired you to want to write this book?
Well, there were a few things. So right after Reg, my husband, died, I went to the bookstore and I went through the grief section, and there were so many books about getting through it and getting over it and telling me that I could thrive again. And I assumed that at some point I would be okay, and at some point maybe life could thrive again, maybe. But I didn't want to be told that early in the journey, because in the journey, especially at the start, it is so excruciatingly painful. And I felt like there were no resources out there that said, this is awful. And it's okay that you feel awful, because our society in general is just very inept at dealing with grief. and we just want to shove it away. I mean, if you look at corporations, like you get 3 days of bereavement. I mean, 3 days, you really need 3 years,
Yes.
right? And
Or
so,
more.
or more, right? So we just don't make space for grieving at all. And I just felt like when I was in the bookstore, the ones that were in there were really about getting through it. And I wasn't, especially a couple weeks after he died, I wasn't ready to get through it. I mean, I couldn't even function. And so I felt like that was important. That's really the reason I wrote it, is I wanted to give, especially widows, but I found that the book is actually, people are loving it for all relationships. But I wanted to give them a way to feel like they weren't alone and that what they were feeling is normal. And I got lucky because I joined a young widows group. And so I made friends with some other widows and realized they were feeling the same thing I was. And then my brother-in-law had passed away 5 years before my husband did. And so my sister-in-law was right there the whole time, like telling me, yes, I felt that. Yes, I felt that. I also worked with a grief counselor. I saw her every week for a year and then saw her actually up to 3 years. And she would tell me, yes, this is normal. Yes, this is normal. Yes, this is normal. So I felt really grateful that I had all these people who could tell me that what I was feeling was normal. But most people don't have that.
Right.
And so that's one reason why I wrote the book, is not because, I mean, this book is not going to substitute for a grief counselor. It's not going to substitute for having other widows in your life who can say, yeah, it's really hard. But I know there's so many people out there who are going through this experience all by themselves. And I wanted this book to be there for them, to sit there with them and to say, yes, it's painful, and this is what I experienced. And the other thing is, I felt like there's so many feelings that grieving people have, but they don't want to admit it, or when they do, they're shamed for it. So, for example, I talk about how mad I was at Reg after he died. I mean, I was mad at him, and I talk about that, and I say, you know, people told me I was wrong, that he didn't mean to die. He tried to survive, and he did. That man, he tried harder than I can't even imagine how hard that man tried to live, but I was still mad. And so I recently met a widow. We were in choir together, and she lost her husband like 20 years ago. So she bought my book, and she called me, this was like 2 weeks ago, and she said, you know, you tell the truth. And she said, when my husband died, her husband was shot somebody went to work and was postal and shot her husband. And she said, I was really mad. And she said, and when I told my mom that, my mom just shamed me and told me I was wrong for feeling that way. And I said, you weren't wrong. I think we all feel that way. So part of what I wanted to do in this book was to admit the things that none of us want to admit, so that people know it's okay to feel that way.
Exactly.
And then honestly, like, I also wanted to write the book because I was just so devastated that he died, and I felt like I had to find some way to give at least a little meaning to his death. And so I felt like, at least if I can help other people, then at least that gives a little bit of meaning to his death. He didn't just die for no reason.
Exactly. Oh, I love that so much. And also you said some key phrases there with, if this is so normal, you know, you're hearing from people who have experienced it, then why isn't it out there for others to feel validated in their own experience and their grief? And like you just said, it's okay to be mad. I don't know, I think I've shared with you before where there has been some widows and widowers in my office. It's a free space and a safe space, and there's so many of them. Hey, you MFer, you know, like, you know, it's like exploding in my office. I'm so glad you're happy. Where do I send the forward to the, you know, for the bills, and where do I do this? And I don't want to hear that you're happy, you know, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay, you know.
Yep.
I love that you express that, because I feel like so many widows that I've been able to refer your book to have come back and said, I love how raw it is, and how I have permission to just, like, if I want to hide in a closet for a day and eat M&Ms all frickin' day, I'm going to do it. I'm grieving. It's just, and again, you wrote it from the platform of your own broken heart, and it's really out, and that's a vulnerable place to be. But I feel that the world, especially those who are grieving from the loss of a spouse, they needed to see that that was okay. There was not a warrior out there until you that came in and said, it's okay that you sleep in their clothes, and it's okay to be very resentful for people holding hands in front of you on the street, or it's really extreme. And that, I mean, I've had so many people come back and say, because first of all, I don't ask them if they want the book. I just hand it to them because I know it could help. And they all have come back and said, it has really touched my heart in so many ways. And it's helped me understand that I don't need to put a timestamp on this. So many people feel like they have to put a timestamp on their grief, or that they have to work through it quickly in order to re-engage with society. And what you've written here is just so beautiful. It's permission to be exactly where you need to be without question. And I love that.
Thank you. So my neighbor had a stroke on Halloween last year.
Okay, yeah.
And so yesterday, and I'm friends with her husband. I didn't know her real well, but I'm friends with her husband. So I called him yesterday and I said, I know that this is a hard day. She didn't die on Halloween. She had the stroke on Halloween and died a little bit later, right? But it was still, that's where the beginning of the end started, right? And so I said, I called him, I said, I know this is a hard day for you, and I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. And he was like, well, I know I shouldn't be moping, and I know, like, I keep thinking about a year ago. And I said, of course you have. Like, why wouldn't you think about a year ago? A year ago, you were happy.
Right.
And then a few hours later, everything changed. And so, but it was like he was berating himself for grieving.
Right.
And I just felt like that was so tragic, because, I just said to him, look, this day, it's going to be painful. And just know that, and have compassion for yourself, and whatever you want to do today, like, because he's like, oh, I'm just sitting here watching a football game. And I said, fine, like, watch a football game.
Right? Yes.
And so it's just have compassion for yourself and allow that to be. Or I have another neighbor who just moved in, I think 2 months ago, whose husband died from COVID. And she was saying something about how at night it was easier because she could turn on the TV so it wasn't so lonely, but that's just at night. And I said, if you need to turn the TV on during the day, turn the TV on during the day. Exactly. There's no rules in grieving.
Right.
But it was like, so I just feel like, that's what I've tried to do with this book, is to say to people, it's like, we have these rules, and like, we got to be over it in a year, and we've got to be, we've got to give their stuff away, and we've got to do this, and we've got to do that. And I think the people who make those rules are people who have never lost anybody they really love. Exactly. Very deeply. And so everybody's lost somebody, but, somebody told me, well, it's time you get rid of his stuff. I got rid of my brother's stuff. Like, not the same thing. I'm sorry. Not. And it's not to say that your grief, and this is what I don't like either, is that we put a judgment on grief. Like, this grief is harder. This grief is harder. Like, you hear from women who have had a miscarriage, or maybe their kid was only a couple days old, and they're judged for having a lot of grief because their kid wasn't 20 when they died or something, right? So I think as a society, we just put so much judgment and pressure on people around grief. And so I don't like that either. And so I tried to make that in the book, like, look, however you need to do this is how you need to do this. And if for you, that means you pack up this life and you move on to your next one, then if that's how you got to do it, that's how you got to do it. And if it takes you 10 years to get through your grief, if that's how you got to do it, that's how you got to do it.
Exactly. It's
So,
almost like we've been conditioned to compartmentalize our emotions in almost everything. And
yeah.
grief is one of those categories. Okay, here's the textbook for that because a psychologist wrote this and this is how you're supposed to follow through. That's why I'm so grateful that you came in as a person who is suffering, who lost her dearly beloved soulmate, right? And who's had to navigate through this and is realizing that she's not alone, but it's almost as if it's something that we're not supposed to talk about because we're supposed to have worked through or processed through this. So that's why I feel your book is just so very brilliant and it's written from the heart. And because I know you, I'm like, oh, that's so Kim. I love that one. Yeah. And so many of the other widows and widowers that I've referred it to, they have come back and went, this was like, for a grief book, it was like a breath of fresh air and a bottle of sunshine because they were allowed to be exactly where they are without feeling they have to present themselves in a certain way to make other people okay.
Right.
If that makes sense too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And it's hard. I mean, it's hard to say. I have a friend whose brother died and I sat with her one night and we were just talking the whole time about him, about the grief. And she said, you know, my other friends won't even sit with me and do this. And so it's like people just, and it's not, I mean, I'm not uncomfortable with grief, honestly. Like you can talk to me all day long about grief and it does not make me uncomfortable. I think just because I've been there.
Sure. Yeah.
And I had an amazing grief counselor who also was not uncomfortable. So, I'm fine sitting with people and talking with them about their grief, but most people aren't, and that's tragic, really. So, yeah,
It is. It truly is. And again, when clients come to me, I'm in a place of you just be exactly where you need to be. I'm delivering the messages here. So if there's explicits, absolutely. We need to add those in there. You're the one recording the session. So, you know, and it's only for your own personal recall. So go for it.
Yeah.
You know, and I do experience when I am sitting with people in their grief, you know, I feel this, I'm feeling the same things because I am quite the empath as well. I mean, I have not lost a spouse, so I can definitely say I do not know what that feels like. But I certainly do know what it feels like to hold space for someone who has. And I'm able to do that because of your help through the book.
No.
And even before you wrote the book, you had some great suggestions through the years. I mean, you've been with me for 6 years from the beginning. My little closet office, you know, that we first had. And I was able to just observe you in your grief to see where, and I don't know if I could share, can I share the whole thing about you, he wouldn't say he was proud first of you driving learning how to drive the stick in his car, right? And
was that what it was about? I couldn't remember what it was about.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah, and I said, I think he's just absolutely happy for you and ecstatic and he's celebrating, but I don't think he's using the word proud. He's just happy. But then later that day, I was at Starbucks and he's like, yeah, you know what? Let's explain it a little bit more to her. So here I am. First time I ever met Kim, first of all, right? And he wants to talk a little bit more about how he really is kind of proud of you for driving that car, you know, for learning how to drive the stick. And so I think I'm mentioning that because there's just so many heartwarming things that come in sessions as well that, you know, so that was.
Well, that's when I knew for sure that you were real and that what you were telling me was the truth, because when he was alive, I would say, well, aren't you proud of me? or something. Like I would do something, I'd be like, aren't you proud of me? And he'd say, sure. Like he was not one to come out and say, oh, I'm so proud of you. Like that's, he would never do that. And so when I said, is he proud of me? And you said, well, he loves you. And I said, but is he proud? And you were like, well, I mean, he loves you. And that's the same. And I said, it's not the same. You can love somebody and not be proud of them.
That's so true.
So I thought, all right, she's clearly real, because it would be easy. I clearly wanted him to say, I'm so proud of you, right? And so you could have so easily have said, of course he's proud of you. And yes, he's very proud of you. But instead you were like, well, I mean, he loves you. And so I thought, all right, she's clearly talking to him, because if she were a fake, she would have said, yes, he's proud of you.
Right. I would have spun a story around it, and I couldn't. I was like, well, I mean, let's define proud, shall we? You know, it's almost like he was getting into that dialect. I'm like, but he's coming in with just great love. And then again, I think it was about 4 or 5 hours later, and I was at the Starbucks line, and I'm waiting on my drink, and you're laughing, like, I get it. Exactly.
But even when you called later, you're like, well, he wants to explain what like pride and love is or whatever. And I was like, look, it's too late. Like he's already said no. And like, and this is what he would do in life too. Like, well, yeah, if I get upset or something, like, yeah, well, of course I'm proud of you. Not too late, so it was the same kind of thing later. So.
Well, I was just so glad you got it.
Yeah.
Because I almost felt a little bit like the scene with Whoopi Goldberg in Ghost when Patrick Swayze was she's talking to him on the streets, and she's just, she's sitting there getting all upset with him, and she's arguing with herself. I almost felt like I was there in the Starbucks line going, yeah, okay, let's call your wife. Oh, hey, everybody else. I'm having a private discussion here with my,
Yeah, well, I appreciated your calling.
Well, and I've appreciated you through the years in helping me understand on a deep level on how to hold space for people, and especially spouses who have lost loved ones and the love of their life. So again, I think I shared with you, I had one lady recently bring her family for a group reading, and I went, I have a book for you. I'm not even going to ask you if you want it. I'll be right back. And they all have been so very grateful. So, and in that, I just feel that this interview was so needed, because so many people, they need to know that what they're feeling. I mean, and I know that this subject is on grief, but really, I feel like we as a society should give people permission to feel what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And so I know that, first of all, the suggestion is to go out and grab the book. However, if you had like an elevator pitch not even an elevator pitch, but the time it took to do an elevator pitch for someone who you've just recently come into, and you've shared a few examples of your neighbor and some friends that you were sitting with. But if there's someone came to you and they were heavy in grief and they didn't know your story, what would be the advice that you would give them? If you had a few minutes.
Wow, I don't know without knowing
the circumstances.
I think what I hate, like I read this article about some psychologists who were saying that if 6 months after your spouse died, you needed help and you needed medication because you're having complicated grief, that infuriated me, right? Because 6 months after your spouse died, if you're still grieving, you're in complicated grief. I don't think so. 6 months after your spouse died is nothing, right?
Right.
So I don't like to say, well, so when you say heavy in grief, like part of me wants to say, well, I would maybe recommend a grief counselor. Okay. But then that feels like I'm judging them too, and it's not. So I guess I guess what I guess what I would say to them is, yeah, it is hard. It is really hard, and it takes a lot of energy. I think we don't realize and understand how much energy it takes to grieve. I mean, I'm the person, I'm up in the morning, I'm immediately brush my teeth, put my contacts in, like, you know, all of that, and I'm dressed and don't go to bed. Like, I'm not that person. But when I was in the early parts of grief, I would go to bed at like 7 o'clock at night and
Right.
just, I mean, you're just exhausted. So I think what I would say to someone is, yes, it takes a lot of energy. It takes, it is really hard. Have compassion for yourself. And if you feel like you need a grief counselor, you know, seek a grief counselor. But I would also be very careful, because one of my friends went to counseling, but it wasn't specifically a grief counselor. It was just a counselor.
Oh, okay.
Basically told her like a year later, you know, you need to be over this and get on with it. And a grief counselor wouldn't do that. A grief counselor knows a year is really no amount of time,
Right.
right? I mean, a year is nothing in the grief process. So I would suggest that for somebody, if they're really struggling, just having somebody to talk to. Or like with my neighbor, I did say, you know, can you find a group of men who are also widowers? Because I do think that that's helpful. Yeah, I think I would just, you know what else I would do? I would say, well, tell me about your spouse.
Right. I love
Because
that.
I think one of the things that happens with grief is that you want to talk about your spouse and people don't want to hear it because it's uncomfortable. So they don't want to hear. I had this happen to me where I would, every time I mentioned Reg's name, somebody would change the subject. Every time I'd mention a name, change it. And it's like, you know, he did exist. We can't
Yes.
pretend like he didn't even exist.
And I love Reg stories. I love, oh my goodness, I can't hear enough.
And I love telling them. Even to this day, I love telling them. And so, you know, I think one of the things I would say to somebody is tell me about your spouse. I would love to hear about him or her. Or if it's somebody who's lost a child, tell me about your child, because we just don't make space for people to share about their loved ones. Yeah, so I think I'm rambling now, but I think that's,
Oh, that's perfect. Absolutely. Engage in conversation to let them share from their heart, and then let them know that it's okay to be gentle with themselves
yeah.
through it. So I definitely love that. So where can we get this amazing?
I'm sorry, let me say one more thing.
Yes,
The other thing
please.
I tell people is, people are going to say, like, there's a chapter in here called People Say Stupid Things.
Yes, I read that one.
And so, you know, people try and yes, and they think they're being helpful, and they think they're being loving, but it's painful sometimes what people say. And so if I met somebody heavy in grief, I think I would also say, I know that people are probably saying some stupid things to you. And my neighbor and I've had this conversation numerous times about people saying stuff to him. And I'm like, you know, they think they're being helpful, but they're not. They're being actually hurtful sometimes. And so, so that's the other thing I would say. So, okay, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh no, not at all. But I would just love to know, where can we get more of the magic? First of all, you have a website for your book, correct?
I do.
Feeling left behind. Okay.
It's just kimmurdock.com.
Okay, kimmurdock.com. And I'll
Yep.
say that again, kimmurdock.com. And I'll also put it in the captions when I post on YouTube as well. And I absolutely love the bench. The bench that actually came out in a session, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
That a picture of a bench should be the cover.
The session was, and I just realized there's like a shadow now coming across in my house, so hopefully I don't look foolish here.
No, you're fine. You look great.
The session was a beautiful picture, but that still had a little bit of sadness, or
okay.
I don't think that's the word sad. It was like, you had given an example of like a rainy day, and so it's still beautiful, but what's the word I'm looking for? It's beautiful still, but there's a sadness there. There's like, it's not joyous.
Right.
And so that's the instruction you had given to me. And then I saw that bench and I thought that's perfect,
That's
because
it. Okay.
it is sort of this wintry kind of scenery, but it's still beautiful.
Yes.
And so, yeah. So no, you were definitely, I thank you for the direction you gave me on the book cover.
Well, I'm just so grateful that I was able to deliver it in that way, that you were able to receive it. So again, I always tell people, I let go and let God. I don't try to give suggestions, but that's what was coming in from Reg at the time, and guides and angels. And when you said, oh, I found it, and it was the bench, and I was like, oh my God, that's perfect. Absolutely. And so you have the website, kimmurdock.com. And then is it also available on Amazon?
So it's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble.
Wow. Yes.
It's on Google Books, Apple Play, Kobo, which is, I think that's Canadian. And then it's on, it's so you can order it from any library. You have to ask, libraries aren't carrying it yet, but they have the ability to order it. You can actually order it from any bookstore. So anybody, like if somebody is watching this in Maine, they can go to their local bookstore and order it. And then anybody who's local here in Colorado, the Tattered Cover carries it. The Tattered Cover on Colfax. There's a little store called the Bookies on Colorado Boulevard that carries it. Hearts of Soul out in Lakewood at Mile High Church, they carry it. I know there's some bookstore, I can't remember the name, in Moab that's carrying it. So there's bookstores around the country that are carrying it, but it can be ordered from any store.
Wonderful.
So, or Amazon.
Wonderful. Well, like I tell you, I like to have a few copies on hand. So I know I usually get it from Amazon, but I'm glad to know that there's several places to get it from. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing this beautiful and vulnerable, on this beautiful and vulnerable subject, and taking your own grief and putting it out there for all of us to see as an example. Because
well, thank you.
I just thank you for that, for showing up in such a beautiful way like that.
Thank you. And thank you for trusting me with your clients, because when you say, here's a book, they're trusting you.
Yes.
And that you're trusting me. So thank you.
Oh, you're so very welcome. And again, absolutely. And that's what I usually say to my clients after readings. Thank you so much for trusting me with your energy through all of this. So with all of that, I trust you explicitly. And I believe there's one other book that I would suggest. And that's also, a book written by another client that you know very well. Who have the same topic of a certain character in your book. She's got the same topic of that certain character in her book as well. But I have your copies on hand. And it was so funny because I was telling you, my home copy's gone. I got to go to the office and grab another copy before we do the interview, because I try to have copies on hand as much as possible. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for just holding space for everyone who needs to read this book when you wrote it. So grateful. So as we close, anything else that you would like to maybe share about the book, the experience, some encouragement for others?
That's a hard one, because I think when you're new into the grief journey, for me, I hated when people kept telling me, oh, it'll get better, it'll get better. But some people also want to hear that it'll get better. So if you're someone who wants to hear it'll get better, it does. It doesn't go away completely.
Right.
I can still be triggered. I can be sitting there watching something on TV and something hits me, and there I am sitting on my couch crying. So it doesn't go away completely, but it becomes less raw. eventually.
Right.
So
Well,
I
on
guess.
that, Kim Murdock, thank you so much for being a guest on Insights with Elisa today. And for anyone who wants to get the book, you can go to kimmurdock.com and grab it. And it's in several locations here in Colorado, and you can get it anywhere. Just like Kim said, you can go to your local bookstore, even if it's in Maine, and order it. So you will absolutely feel blessed by this book. So much love, light, and insight. The matters of your heart truly matter to my heart. Much love.